This time, therefore, I will proceed and call upon our partners from the Philippine Department of Environment and Natural Resources. We have with us today Undersecretary Tessam Castillo, who represents the DENR. Tessam, as she is more popularly known, has been in government service for more than 20 years, both in the executive and legislative departments. She has served in various capacities under 4 administrations as Director of the Presidential Management Staff, who handled its regional operations group and managed the first 3 years of the President's Social Fund. Tessam was also once upon a time with the National Commission for the Role of Filipino Women. May I now call on Undersecretary Tessam Castillo, representing the Department of Environment and Natural Resources.
It is my pleasure to read the message of our Secretary Jose L. Atienza Jr. It is with great pleasure that we welcome the participants to this 3rd Global Congress of Women in Politics and Governance with its theme, Gender in Climate Change and Disaster Risk Reduction. Distinguished legislators, especially Deputy Speaker Villarosa, and decision makers from the national and local governments, delegates of environmental organizations, funding and donor organizations, members of the press, youth leaders, participants from across the Asia-Pacific and the rest of the world, welcome to this Global Congress. This forum aims to provide the world's maker of laws, policies, and decisions, and leaders at all levels, insights and inputs for gender-responsive legislation, as well as programs related to gender in response to climate change and disaster risk reduction. Climate change is no longer an impending threat. We are already experiencing its preliminary onslaughts, mainly in the form of extreme weather events and the destruction that they inflict. The Philippines, an archipelago of more than 7,000 islands, is expected to be among the countries hardest hit by the time that, heaven forbid, climate change reaches its peak. Thus, we are fortunate indeed to be hosting this Global Congress. But I must hasten to add that there is a great deal more at stake in the Philippines than the welfare of our republic and the people. The Philippines happens to be among the world's richest repositories of terrestrial and marine biodiversity. The Philippines is home to the center of the Coral Triangle, our planet's greatest treasury of marine biodiversity. By inducing coral bleaching and disrupting ecosystems, climate change can devastate our biodiversity wholesale, thereby depriving humanity of potential remedies to hunger and malnutrition, diseases, and other persistent problems. As in many other parts of the world, particularly in Asia, the brunt of climate change here is most likely to fall on the marginalized sectors of society, the farmers, fisherfolks, upland dwellers, and the urban poor. They are the most defenseless and ill-prepared, millions of them having been forced by circumstances to live in poorly built structures along the coasts, riverbanks, and fluvial plains that a 1-meter rise in sea level can inundate. Meanwhile, upland dwellers, many of them indigenous peoples, will be assaulted by disease-carrying mosquitoes and other lowland pests drawn to the mountains by higher humidity. Here in the Philippines, much of the projected impact has been quantified, but I shall spare you from the grisly statistics from now. Suffice it to say that the poor will be the foremost victims, and that the women and the children among them are the greatest risk. These are just some of the various catastrophic scenarios that can overwhelm us unless humanity musters the unanimity, cooperation, and resolve necessary to make climate change mitigation and adaptation measures. Although climate change affects everyone, it is not gender neutral. Climate change magnifies existing inequalities, reinforcing the disparities between women and men in their capabilities to cope with climate change because of unnecessary differentiations in their political, economic, cultural, and social roles responsibilities, and decision-making powers. Women with their restricted access to resources and information and their limited participation in decision-making are thus prevented from contributing to the fullest of their potentials towards climate change coping mechanisms. This is changing in the Philippines. Given the Philippine vulnerability to global warming, our Department of Environment and Natural Resources and other relevant agencies of the government have formulated an integrated action plan on climate change. Going further, we plan to hold a workshop on mainstreaming gender concerns in climate change policies and programs to be able to develop gender-responsive projects on climate change. This will also ensure the participation of women in climate change initiatives and strengthen the role of women's groups and networks. Further, a current project on disaster risk management focuses on the development of preparedness and coping capacities through the identification and mapping of various geohazards and risks along our eastern seaboard facing the Pacific Ocean. We are mainstreaming the information into national and local development processes and helping vulnerable communities prepare for natural disasters through measures like early warning systems. To repeat, climate change and disasters do not segregate their victims by gender. It only follows that humanity's solutions for coping with them should not be men's burdens alone, but also the privilege of women. Women are entitled to information and resources that will empower them to make appropriate decisions and take corresponding actions. They are entitled to participate in decision-making and in many forms, including lawmaking and policy formulation. They are entitled to participate in governance, to assume positions of trust and responsibility and power and leadership. They are entitled to step up from the background onto the front lines. And it will help us, all of us, if these processes are facilitated and accelerated as this global Congress is set to do. The 18th century American poet and songwriter William Ross Wallace wrote, "The hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world." I believe that this is not the point here, but rather that the genders stand on equal footing with neither need nor cause to dominate one another. We are partners facing global threats, together determined not to be overwhelmed but to prevail. If women happen to be in the majority here and now, it is only because they have been absent, uninvited for so long in many occasions in the past. On this note, let us get going. Welcome to the Philippines and welcome to the 3rd Global Congress of Women in Politics in Governments. Mabuhay kayong lahat.